"I know how to make you see again," said the beggar boy to the blind man. Dr. Richard Anderson walked through Cathedral Square in New York City, as he did every morning, tapping his white cane along the uneven cobblestones. He had lost his sight 5 years ago in an accident that destroyed not only his eyes, but the entire life he knew as an ophthalmologist. That's when he felt a small, calloused hand touch his left arm. "Doctor, I know how to make you see again," said a child's voice, firm yet gentle. Richard stopped immediately. The voice didn't sound like that of an ordinary beggar. There was something different in its tone, a certainty that unsettled him. "Who are you, boy?" he asked, trying to pull away. "My name is Michael James, but everyone calls me Mikey. You're Dr. Richard, right? The eye doctor who worked at General Hospital." Richard's heart raced. It had been years since anyone called him doctor. Since the accident, he was just Richard, the blind man living on a small pension. "How do you know who I am?" "My grandpa talked about you, said you were the best eye doctor in New York City before what happened?" The boy's voice hesitated. Richard felt his hands tremble. Who was this child? How did he know his story? "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it's not a scam, doctor," Mikey interrupted. "My grandpa taught me things. He knew how to heal eyes in a way different from the hospital doctors. He helped a lot of people even when the doctors said there was no hope." There was something in the boy's voice that made Richard stop completely, a sincerity he hadn't heard in years. "Where is your grandpa?" He passed 2 months ago, but before he left he made me promise one thing. He said I had to find Dr. Richard and help you see again." A shiver ran down Richard's spine. This was impossible. The best specialists in the country had examined his eyes after the accident. The diagnosis was final: total and irreversible blindness due to optic nerve damage. "Son, I don't know what stories your grandpa told you, but my condition can't be fixed. I've seen the best doctors in New York City, even from overseas. There's nothing that can be done." "That's what all the doctors say," Mikey agreed. "My grandpa always said that too, that doctors only know medicine and surgery, but they forget the body has other ways to heal." Richard shook his head, ready to walk away. He'd dealt with enough charlatans in the first years after the accident. Healers, faith peddlers, sellers of false hope. They all promised miracles and they all left him more disillusioned. "Doctor, please." The boy's voice was almost desperate. "Just let me show you one thing. If it doesn't work, I'll never bother you again." Something in the urgency of that voice made Richard hesitate. Maybe it was the memory of when he himself was a child and no one believed in his dreams of becoming a doctor. Or maybe it was just the loneliness of the last 5 years speaking louder. "What do you want to show me?" He heard the sound of paper unfolding. Old paper by the sound of it. "My grandpa wrote everything down here. Look, it even has your name. Richard Anderson, 52 years old. Blindness from optic nerve trauma after a car accident in 2019. Richard froze. How did this boy know such specific details about his case? "Where did you get this information?" "My grandpa knew a lot of people in the hospitals. He always said he'd find a way to help you, but..." The boy's voice faltered. "But he ran out of time." Richard stood silent for a few seconds, feeling the movement of people around the square, the noise of cars, the smell of pretzels frying at a nearby stall. All of this had become his new reality, a world made only of sounds, smells, and textures. "And what exactly did your grandfather write about me?" "That you don't have total nerve damage, that there's still a part that can work, but it's, as he used to say, asleep, and that there are exercises that can wake that part up." Richard almost laughed. Exercises to wake up optic nerves? That made no medical sense. "Son, I studied medicine for years. I was an ophthalmology specialist. If there was some magical exercise to cure blindness, I'd know about it." "You know all about medicine and surgeries," said Mikey with surprising maturity for his age. "But my grandfather knew about other things, about how the body connects with the mind, about how sometimes we can wake up parts that are sleeping." Richard sighed. It was obvious he was wasting his time, but there was something about that boy that intrigued him. Maybe it was just the lingering medical curiosity still left in him. Where do you live, Mikey? I live right here in the square. I sleep under the church awning when it's not raining. Are you an orphan? My mum, she passed when I was little. My grandfather raised me until... The boy's voice faltered again, and Richard felt a pang of compassion. He knew the pain of loss all too well. And there's no one else in your family? No, sir, it's just me now. Richard fell silent for a moment, reflecting. His own life had become an empty routine since losing his sight. He'd wake up, have coffee, walk to the square, go back home, listen to the radio, sleep. The next day, it would all repeat. His wife had left in the second year after the accident, saying she couldn't live with his new version anymore. Listen, Mikey, he finally said. I don't believe in miracles. But if you want, you can show me those papers from your grandfather, just out of medical curiosity. He heard the boy exhale in relief. Thank you, doctor. You won't regret it. My grandfather always said that. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Where are we going? Richard asked, interrupting the boy's enthusiasm. Do you live far from here? Richard hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of bringing strangers home, let alone street kids. But there was something about Mikey that made him feel less alone than he had in years. I live over in the Upper East Side, 20 minutes by subway. Can I come with you? Richard thought for a moment. Mrs. Peterson, his housekeeper, certainly wouldn't approve. She already coddled him too much, treating him like a helpless child. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of curiosity, an interest in something new. You can come, but just so I can see those papers from your grandfather. After that, you leave. Yes, sir. The subway ride was quiet. Richard could hear the boys breathing beside him, noticed how he marveled at everything, the noise of the train, the escalators, the crowd. It was obvious Mikey wasn't used to this kind of transportation. When they arrived at Richard's apartment, a modest two-bedroom on a quiet street in the Upper East Side, Mrs. Peterson nearly dropped the coffee tray she was carrying. Dr. Richard, who is this boy? Betty, this is Mikey. He came to show me some papers that might be interesting. Mrs. Peterson, a woman in her 60s who had worked with Richard for 15 years, eyed the boy suspiciously. His torn clothes, bare feet and messy hair, everything about him screamed trouble. Dr. Richard, can I speak with you in the kitchen? Betty, it's fine, the boy won't stay long. But Doctor, it's fine, Richard repeated more firmly. Mrs. Peterson grumbled something about strange people and went back to the kitchen, making sure to clatter the pots louder than necessary. Richard guided Mikey to the living room, where they sat on the leather couch he had bought years ago when he was still a successful doctor. Now show me those papers. He heard the sound of paper being unfolded again. Several sheets, it seemed. Here, doctor. My grandfather wrote everything by hand. He always said handwriting carries more energy than those computer things. Richard reached out and touched the paper. It was thick, slightly yellowed, and indeed covered in handwritten words. He ran his fingers over the writing, trying to decipher it by touch, but couldn't make anything out. Can you read it to me? Sure. Here it says, Richard Anderson, ophthalmologist, 52 years old, partial blindness due to trauma to the optic nerves. Car accident, March 2019. Lost all eye movement, but MRI indicates 30% of nerves still intact. Richard straightened up on the couch. The information was correct. But how had this boy's grandfather gotten it? Go on. Medical diagnosis, irreversible. But dormant nerves can be reactivated through specific stimulation. Method developed by me after 40 years, studying connections between body and mind. Successfully tested on 12 patients with similar conditions. 12 patients? Richard interrupted. Your grandfather treated 12 blind people. Yes, sir, he always talked about it. Said doctors give up too quickly, that they don't know the body has healing powers they never taught in medical school. Richard shook his head. It was hard to believe, but the details about his case were too precise to be made up. What else does it say? There's a list of exercises. Breathing exercises, eye movement exercises, concentration exercises, and... Mikey hesitated. And what? And there's a photo of you, Doctor. Richard froze. A photo of me? From where? Looks like it's from the newspaper. It says underneath, Doctor, Richard Anderson, one of New York City's top ophthalmologists, goes blind after accident. It's from May 2019. Richard vaguely remembered the article. At the time, his story had made the news precisely because of the cruel irony, an eye doctor losing his sight. But why would Mikey's grandfather have kept it? Did your grandfather know me personally? I don't know, Doctor. He never said. He just said he owed you a debt. A debt? What kind of debt? Mikey was silent for a moment. Can I tell you something, Doctor? Of course. My mom, before she passed, she was your patient. Richard felt his heart quicken. In 15 years of practice, he had seen thousands of patients. But something in the boy's voice stirred a distant memory in his mind. What was your mother's name? Jennifer. Jennifer Davis. Richard fell completely silent. Jennifer Davis, a young mother of 25, who had come to his office with advanced glaucoma. She was nearly blind when she sought treatment, desperate because she couldn't afford private surgery, and the Medicaid waiting list would take years. Richard remembered the case perfectly because he had done something he rarely did, treated Jennifer for free, and arranged for her to have the surgery at no cost at the private hospital where he operated. Your mother, she had glaucoma? Yes, sir, Mikey confirmed, his voice thick. My grandfather always told me how you saved her vision, said because of that she was able to work and raise me until she got sick with other things. Richard felt tears forming in his sightless eyes. Jennifer Davis. He remembered the relief on her face when he told her the surgery had been a success. He remembered her crying with gratitude, promising she'd find a way to repay him one day. Why didn't you tell me this before? My grandfather said you might be sad if you knew, that sometimes it's better to help without saying why. Richard was moved. During all those years of bitterness and self-pity, he had forgotten the good moments of his career, the lives he'd saved, the people he'd helped. And your grandfather? Was he a doctor too? No, sir. He was... How can I explain? He knew things about healing that don't come from books. He learned from his father, who learned from his grandfather. It was a family wisdom. Richard reflected. As a doctor, he had always been skeptical of alternative treatments, but as a desperate patient, he began to feel a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. These exercises, are they dangerous? No, sir. My grandfather always said that what heals the body can never harm it. They're gentle exercises, breathing and movement. Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. All right, Mikey, I'll let you show me these exercises of your grandfather's, but on one condition. What, doctor? You'll stay here during the treatment. I won't let you go back to the streets. He heard the boy sniffle softly. You'd really do that? Your mother once did a lot for me without even knowing it. Now it's my turn to return the favor. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway just then, clearly having overheard the conversation. Dr. Richard, are you sure about what you're doing? I am, Betty. Prepare the guest room for Mikey. But Dr. Betty, Richard said with a firmness he hadn't shown in years. This boy is staying here, and we're going to try the treatment his grandfather developed. Mrs. Peterson let out a deep sigh, but Richard knew her well enough to understand she wouldn't argue further. Deep down, he knew she was also worried about his loneliness and depression. All right, doctor, but the boy will have to take a bath and wear clean clothes before sleeping in the guest room. Richard smiled for the first time in months. Of course, Betty, you can take care of that. When Mikey returned from his bath, wearing old clothes of Richard's that Mrs. Peterson had temporarily adjusted, Richard could hardly believe the change. The boy looked years younger, and there was a light in his eyes that radiated hope and determination. So, doctor, Mikey said, sitting beside Richard again, can we start the exercises tomorrow? We can. But tell me something. Why do you have so much faith this will work?" Mikey was quiet for a moment. "Because my grandfather never lied to me, doctor, and because I promised him I'd help you. It's the only thing I have left of him." Richard felt a lump in his throat. How long had it been since he'd felt like someone truly cared about him? "And if it doesn't work, Mikey, what if your grandfather was wrong? Then at least we tried, right, doctor? And sometimes trying is already a kind of victory." Richard smiled again. That street kid had a wisdom many adults lacked. That night, for the first time in years, Richard slept with a different feeling in his chest. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it wasn't the usual despair either. It was something in between, a curiosity mixed with affection for the boy who had entered his life like an unexpected gift. The next morning, Richard woke to the smell of fresh coffee and scrambled eggs. How long had it been since he'd woken up like this? Mrs. Peterson always made his breakfast, but this time there were voices in the kitchen. "Good morning, doctor," Mikey called out as Richard entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Peterson is teaching me how to make sugar bread." "Sugar bread?" Richard asked, confused. "That's what he calls French rolls, doctor," Mrs. Peterson explained with amusement in her voice. Seems like he's never seen a fresh French roll before. Richard felt a pang of sadness imagining the life this boy must have had. But soon after came a feeling of determination. He would take care of Mikey regardless of whether the treatment worked or not. "Mikey, have you had breakfast yet?" "Yes, doctor. Mrs. Peterson made scrambled eggs for me." "Wow, it's been so long since I had scrambled eggs." The boy's joy was contagious. Richard sat at the table and for the first time in years truly savored his breakfast instead of just swallowing it automatically. "So," Richard said after finishing his meal, "shall we start this treatment?" "Absolutely," Mikey replied enthusiastically. "My grandpa always said the best time to exercise the mind is right after feeding the body." They headed to the living room, and Mikey began reading the instructions left by his grandfather. "The first exercise is about breathing, doctor. You have to sit up straight, close your eyes, and breathe in a special way." "A special way? How so?" "Inhale while counting to 4, hold your breath while counting to 4, and exhale while counting to 8. And while doing it, you have to imagine a light entering through your eyes along with the air." Richard smiled skeptically. It sounded more like meditation than medical treatment, but he decided to try it. After all, he had nothing to lose. He closed his eyes and began breathing as Mikey instructed. At first he felt silly, as if he were participating in some meaningless, mystical ritual, but after a few minutes, he noticed he was genuinely more relaxed than he had been in a long time. "How are you feeling, doctor?" "Relaxed," Richard admitted, "but I don't feel anything different in my eyes. My grandpa always said the body takes time to wake up. It's like a hibernating bear. You have to call it gently." They continued the exercise for another 15 minutes. Richard had to admit that even if he didn't feel anything in his eyes, he was enjoying these moments of peace. "Now comes the next exercise," Mikey said, consulting the papers. "You have to move your eyes in specific ways." "Move my eyes? But I can't see anything." "You don't need to see, doctor. It's just the movement, like exercise for your eye muscles." Mikey guided Richard through a series of eye movements. Up, down, side to side, slow circles. At first, Richard only felt the muscles stretching, but after a few minutes he began to feel a strange sensation behind his eyelids. "Mikey," he said suddenly, "I'm feeling something weird." "What do you mean, doctor?" "It's like there's a warm pressure behind my eyes." Mikey almost shouted with excitement. "My grandpa wrote about this. It says here, when the patient starts feeling warm pressure, it's a sign that circulation is returning to the dormant nerves." Richard didn't want to get too excited, but he couldn't deny he was feeling something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Even if it was just a physical sensation without meaning, it was better than the total emptiness he knew. "Let's keep going," he said, surprised by his own determination. They spent another hour doing exercises. Some involved gently pressing certain areas around the eyes, while others were concentration exercises where Richard had to imagine specific colors and shapes. "That's enough for today, doctor," Mikey finally said. "My grandpa always said you shouldn't force the body. It's better to do a little every day than too much at once." Richard felt strangely energized. It had been years since he actively engaged in something, since he felt like he was working toward a goal. "Mikey, can I ask you something?" "Of course, doctor." "Why are you doing this? I mean, you kept your promise to your grandpa. You've already brought me the treatment. Why don't you leave and find a family to adopt you, or an orphanage or something?" Mikey stayed quiet for a long time. "Can I be honest, doctor?" "Of course. It's just that I never really had a family. Only my grandfather, and he was already very sick when he taught me these things, and here it feels like I have a place. You treat me like I matter, and Mrs. Peterson is teaching me how to cook. It's the first time in my life I've felt useful." Richard felt his chest tighten. That boy was giving so much more than he was receiving, and he didn't even realize it. "You do matter, Mikey, and whether this treatment works or not, you have a place here for as long as you want." "Really, doctor?" "Really." That afternoon, Richard called his lawyer for the first time in months. "Dr. Richard," said Dr. Jonathan Miller, surprised. "It's been so long. How have you been?" "Jonathan, I need you to look into something for me. I need to know about the legal process for adopting a child." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Adoption? Richard, are you sure? I mean, given your current condition—" "My condition doesn't stop me from being a good father, Jonathan," Richard said, with a firmness that even surprised himself. "It just stops me from seeing." Of course, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. It's just unexpected. Have you known the child long?" 2 days. Richard laughed at his own answer. "I know it sounds crazy, but there's something special about this boy, and he has no one else in the world." "I see. Well, I'll look into everything and send you a report, but I can tell you now, the process might be complicated. You'll need psychological evaluations, social worker visits, proof of income. Do whatever it takes, Jonathan. This boy is helping me in ways you can't imagine." After hanging up, Richard realized he was smiling. When was the last time he had truly smiled? When was the last time he'd made plans for the future? The following days established a new routine in the apartment. Richard woke up early, had breakfast with Mikey and Mrs. Peterson. Then they did 2 hours of exercises in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. In between, Richard helped Mikey with basic English and math lessons. He discovered the boy was smart but had missed a lot of school. Mrs. Peterson, initially reluctant, began to grow fond of him. Richard listened to their conversations in the kitchen, Mikey asking 1,000 questions about recipes, and Mrs. Peterson patiently teaching him everything. "Dr. Richard," she said at the end of the first week, "I need to admit something." "What is it, Betty?" "That boy has done more for you in 1 week than I've managed in 5 years. You're different. More alive." Richard knew she was right. For the first time since the accident, he had a reason to wake up every day. He had someone who depended on him, someone who saw him not as the broken man he'd become, but as the respected doctor he had been. It was during the 2nd week of treatment that something extraordinary happened. Richard was doing one of the eye movement exercises when he suddenly shouted, "Mikey, Mikey, come here." The boy ran into the living room. "What is it, doctor? Are you okay?" I think I saw something." "What do you mean?" "When I moved my eyes to the right just now, for a split second, I think I noticed a flicker of light." Mikey nearly jumped for joy. "My grandfather said this would happen. He said the first sign would be a flicker of light. Can you try again?" Richard repeated the movement, focusing intensely. And there it was again, a very faint flash of light lasting less than a second. "There's something there, Mikey. It's very weak, but there's something." "Do you want to keep doing the exercises?" "Yes. Let's increase the time. If it's working, we need to push harder." They spent the rest of the day focused on the exercises. Richard was euphoric, but tried to keep his expectations in check. After all, a flicker of light was far from meaning he would regain his sight. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, repeating the eye exercises over and over, trying to recreate that sensation of brightness. And around 2 in the morning, he succeeded. This time, it lasted almost 3 seconds. It wasn't full vision, but it was definitely light perception. The next morning, Richard was eager to tell Mikey, but the boy didn't show up for breakfast. "Betty, where's Mikey?" "I don't know, Doctor. I knocked on his door, but he didn't answer." Richard grew worried. Mikey always woke up early, excited to start the exercises. He went to the boy's room and knocked. "Mikey, are you okay?" A weak voice replied, "I'm fine, Doctor. Just a little headache." Richard opened the door and stepped inside. Even without seeing, he knew something was wrong. "Can I come closer?" "Sure." Richard approached the bed and touched Mikey's forehead. It was burning with fever. "Betty," he shouted, "call a doctor. Mikey has a high fever." The next moments were a whirlwind. Richard called his friend, Dr. William Thompson, who came to the apartment immediately. While the doctor examined Mikey, Richard paced nervously around the living room. "Richard," Dr. Williams said after the examination, "the boy has a severe respiratory infection, probably pneumonia. He needs to be hospitalized." "Pneumonia?" Richard felt the world spin. But how? He was fine yesterday. Street children are very vulnerable to these kinds of infections. Their immune systems are weakened by poor nutrition and exposure to the cold. How long did he live on the streets? 2 months, Richard answered, his voice tight. That explains it. His body is still recovering from those harsh conditions. But don't worry, with the right treatment, he'll be okay. Richard accompanied Mikey to the hospital, feeling completely lost. During the ambulance ride, he held the boy's hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness from the fever. "Doctor," Mikey murmured, "the exercises. We have to keep doing the exercises." "Don't worry about that now, Mikey. Just focus on getting better." "But doctor, my grandpa, I promised." "You've already kept your promise. Now let me take care of you." At the hospital, Richard felt utterly useless. He couldn't see the monitors, couldn't fully understand what the doctors were saying. He felt like a burden. Dr. William reassured him. "Richard, he'll be fine. It's bacterial pneumonia. It responds well to antibiotics. But he'll need to stay for at least a week." A week. Richard couldn't imagine going home without Mikey, returning to the empty routine of before. "Can I stay here with him?" "Of course. I'll arrange a chair for you to sleep in the room." For the first 3 days, Mikey was delirious with fever. Richard stayed by his bedside, holding his hand, listening to his labored breathing. Mrs. Peterson came every day with food and clean clothes. "Dr. Richard," she said on the 3rd day, "you need to rest. You haven't slept properly since you got here." "I can't leave him alone, Betty. He has no one else." "He has you now," she said gently, "and that's more than most children have." In the early hours of the 4th day, Richard woke to Mikey calling his name. "Doctor, are you there?" His voice was clearer, stronger. "I'm here, Mikey. How are you feeling?" "Better. The fever's gone. But doctor, what about the exercises? We haven't done them in days." Richard laughed, relieved to hear the boy worrying about that. "The exercises can wait. You need to recover first." "But doctor, did you see that brightness again?" Richard hesitated. In recent days, focused on his concern for Mikey, he had completely forgotten to try reproducing the flash of light. "I haven't tried, to be honest." "Can you try now?" "Now?" "Please, doctor. I want to know if it's working." Richard sighed and closed his eyes. He made the eye movements he had learned, concentrating. And then, "My God," he whispered. "What is it, doctor?" "Mikey, I'm seeing a steady glow. It's not just a flash, it's a faint but constant light." Richard heard Mikey cry with joy in the hospital bed. "My grandfather was right. I knew he was right." Richard was too emotional to speak. For the first time in 5 years, there was light in his world. It was little, it was faint, but it was there. "Mikey," he finally said, "you saved my life. Do you know that?" "No, doctor. You saved mine. If it weren't for you, I'd still be sleeping in the square." Richard held the boy's hand. "We saved each other." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Mikey was discharged from the hospital a week later, Richard was eager to resume the exercises. The steady glow he perceived had grown more intense, and sometimes he could distinguish between light and shadow. "I think we can intensify the treatment now," Mikey said as soon as they got home. "My grandfather wrote about this stage. When the patient starts perceiving steady light, it's time to move on to advanced exercises." "Advanced exercises?" Richard asked. "They're exercises to try forming images. You'll focus on the light you're seeing and try to turn it into shapes." It seemed impossible, but Richard was willing to try anything. Mikey guided him through a series of more complex exercises where he had to imagine simple geometric shapes while moving his eyes. It was during one of these exercises that it happened. Richard was imagining a circle, moving his eyes in circular motions, when suddenly, "Mikey!" he shouted. "I saw it! I saw a shape!" "Really, Doctor? What shape?" "It was like a dark smudge against a lighter background. It only lasted a second, but I saw it." Mikey was so excited, he could hardly stand still. "That's exactly what my grandfather said would happen. You're regaining your sight, Doctor." Richard didn't want to get too carried away, but he couldn't deny something extraordinary was happening. After 5 years of total darkness, there were finally signs that maybe, just maybe, he could see again. The following days brought steady progress. Richard could clearly tell the difference between light and shadow, and occasionally made out vague shapes. It wasn't sight in the traditional sense, but it was infinitely more than he'd had in years. Then things began to get complicated. One Tuesday morning, Richard heard the doorbell ring insistently. Mrs. Peterson went to answer it and returned visibly nervous. "Dr. Richard, there's a woman here who says she's a social worker. She wants to speak to you about Mikey." Richard's stomach turned to ice. "A social worker?" "Yes, doctor. She says she received a complaint that a child is living here irregularly." Richard walked to the door where he found a woman with a serious professional tone. "Dr. Richard Anderson." "That's me. My name is Mrs. Sarah Jenkins from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous complaint that you're keeping a child in an irregular situation. Is it true that a minor is living in your home?" Richard took a deep breath. "It's true, but I can explain the situation. Do you have legal custody of this child?" "Not yet, but I've already started the adoption process." "I see. I need to speak with the child and assess the conditions he's living in. May I come in?" Richard had no choice. He led the social worker to the living room, where Mikey was reading a book Mrs. Peterson had bought for him. "Hi," the woman said, softening her tone. "Are you Michael James?" "I am, but everyone calls me Mikey." "All right, Mikey, my name is Sarah. I'm from Child Protective Services. Do you know what that means?" "I think so. You take care of kids who don't have families." "That's right. Can I ask you a few questions?" Richard tensed but tried to stay calm. "Is Dr. Richard treating you well?" "Yes," Mikey answered eagerly. "He gave me my own room, good food, clean clothes, and Mrs. Peterson is teaching me how to cook." "Are you going to school?" Mikey hesitated and looked at Richard. "Not yet," Richard answered, "but I've already enrolled him. He'll start next week." "I see." The social worker made a few notes. "Mikey, do you feel safe here?" "I do. Dr. Richard takes care of me like a father." Richard's chest tightened at the boy's words. The social worker continued the interview for a few more minutes, checked Mikey's room, and spoke with Mrs. Peterson. Finally, she turned back to Richard. "Dr. Anderson, the child's situation seems stable, but you must understand you can't just informally adopt a child. There are legal procedures that must be followed." "I understand completely. As I said, I've already started the legal adoption process. Even so, until the process is finalized, Mikey should be in a registered foster home or shelter." Panic gripped Richard. "Are you taking him?" "Not right now. Considering the child is well cared for and you've initiated legal proceedings, I'll give you 30 days to formalize the situation. But if there's no significant progress in the adoption process by then, Mikey will have to be moved to a shelter." After the social worker left, Richard was silent for a long time. "Doctor," Mikey said in a small voice, "are they going to take me away?" "Not if I can help it," Richard answered firmly. "I'm calling my lawyer right now." The conversation with Dr. Jonathan was tense. "Richard, I warned you this process would be complicated. Your visual impairment could be seen as a barrier by the evaluators. But I'm starting to see a little. The treatment is working." "That's great, but can you prove it? You need updated medical reports, a full battery of tests." "Then do whatever's necessary, Jonathan. I won't lose this boy." "All right, I'll speed things up as much as I can, but you need to prepare for the possibility that there might not be enough time." Richard hung up with a heavy heart. How could he explain to Mikey that they might be separated just as they were becoming a family? That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in the living room, practicing the exercises Mikey had taught him, desperately trying to speed up his vision recovery. If he could prove his sight was improving, maybe it would help the adoption. It was during one of these nighttime exercises that something incredible happened. Richard focused hard, straining to make out shapes in the dark room, when suddenly he saw something that made his heart stop. A shadow. A human figure standing in the doorway. "Who's there?" he whispered. "It's me, Doctor. Mikey." Richard couldn't believe it. He was actually seeing the outline of the boy against the brighter light of the hallway. "Mikey, come here." The boy stepped forward, and Richard could follow his movement. It was a very limited vision, just shadows and outlines. But it was vision. "I can see you," whispered Richard, emotional. "Not clearly, but I can see your silhouette." Mikey ran and hugged him. "My grandfather was right. I knew he was right." "Why weren't you sleeping?" asked Richard. "I was worried. What if they take me before you're completely better?" Richard hugged the boy tightly. "That won't happen. I'll do everything in my power to make sure you stay here." "And if it doesn't work?" Richard hesitated. He didn't want to lie to the boy, but he also didn't want to take away his hope. "If it doesn't work, we'll keep fighting until it does. You taught me that sometimes trying is already a kind of victory, remember?" Mikey smiled. Richard could vaguely see the movement of his face. "I remember. Then we'll keep trying. Together." The following days were intense. Richard went to several doctors, had tests done, and confirmed that he was indeed regaining some of his sight. The ophthalmologists were intrigued. Officially, his condition was irreversible. Dr. Robert Wilson, the specialist who had been treating him since the accident, was completely baffled. "Richard, this is extraordinary. Based on previous tests, this would be impossible. How did you manage this improvement?" Richard explained about Mikey's exercises, about the method developed by the boy's grandfather. Dr. Robert listened skeptically, but couldn't argue with the results. "Well, regardless of the method, the fact is you've regained about 30% of the vision in your right eye and 20% in your left. It's not normal vision, but it's functional for basic tasks. Is it enough for the adoption process?" "It should be. With this improvement, you can no longer be considered completely disabled." Richard left the office with renewed hope. Maybe there was still time to save his new family. But when he got home, he found Mrs. Peterson crying in the kitchen. "What happened, Betty?" "Dr. Richard?" The social worker came back. She said she received a new complaint, more serious this time. "What kind of complaint?" "Someone said you're taking advantage of the boy somehow, using him for some kind of strange ritual." Richard was furious. "Ritual? What kind of person would make such an accusation?" "I don't know, doctor, but she said she'll have to do a deeper investigation and that it might be better to remove Mikey temporarily until everything is cleared up." Richard felt his world collapse. Who could be making these complaints? Who would want to separate him and Mikey? "Where's Mikey?" "In his room. He's very scared, doctor." Richard went to the room and found the boy sitting on the bed, hugging a small stuffed bear Mrs. Peterson had bought for him. "Doctor," Mikey said, his voice trembling, "they're really going to take me, aren't they?" Richard sat on the bed beside him. With his limited vision, he could vaguely see the boy's sad face. "I don't know, Mikey. But I want you to know one thing. No matter what happens, you'll always be my son. Even if they separate us temporarily, I'll fight until I can bring you back. And if they don't let you, then we'll run away far, far away," Richard said, half joking, half serious. We'll go somewhere no one can separate us." Mikey smiled for the first time in days. "You'd really do that?" "I would. You gave me back hope, Mikey. You gave me back the will to live. I won't give up on you." That night, Richard called every contact he still had in the medical field, trying to find out who could be behind the complaints. It was his friend Dr. William who gave him the first clue. "Richard, you won't believe what I found out. Remember Dr. Harold Stevens? Harold Stevens?" Richard vaguely remembered the name. "An older, arrogant colleague who always criticized unconventional methods. What's his problem?" "He's spreading that you've lost your mind, that you're being fooled by a street kid. Said it's dangerous for a child to live with someone in an unstable mental state." Richard was furious. "Unstable mental state? How dare he? Apparently, he found out about your alternative treatment and thought you were being exploited. Said it was his duty as a doctor to protect you." "Protect me? He's destroying my family." "Richard, calm down. What are you going to do?" Richard thought for a moment. "I'll confront him. I'll show him that I'm regaining my sight, that the treatment is working." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "It's the only idea I have." The next day, Richard went to Dr. Harold Stevens' office. With his limited vision, he managed to get there alone for the first time in years, using only a light cane instead of the traditional white cane. Dr. Harold was visibly surprised to see him. "Richard, how did you get here by yourself?" "I can see, Harold. Not perfectly, but I can." That's impossible. Your tests..." "My tests have changed. The treatment the boy taught me really works." Dr. Harold shook his head skeptically. "Richard, you're being manipulated. That child is exploiting you, taking advantage of your desperation." "Manipulated?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Harold, that boy gave me back my life. He gave me back hope, and you're trying to destroy that." "I'm trying to protect you. These quacks are dangerous, Richard. They prey on vulnerable people." "Vulnerable?" Richard stepped closer to Harold's desk, barely able to see it. "You want to see how vulnerable I am?" Richard picked up a pen from the desk and wrote his name on a piece of paper. It wasn't perfect, but it was legible. "This is impossible," Harold murmured. "It is possible, and it's happening. Now I want you to stop these false reports." "Richard, even if you can see a little, that doesn't mean it's safe for a child." "Doesn't mean," Richard interrupted. "Harold, I've cared for thousands of patients in my career. I've saved hundreds of people's sight. Now that I'm blind, or partially blind, suddenly I'm incapable of caring for a child." Harold fell silent. "The boy is being well taken care of," Richard continued. "He has a roof, food, education, love. He has a family, something he never had before." "But the risks..." "What risks, Harold?" "The risk of a child having a family. The risk of someone caring for him." Richard turned to leave but stopped at the door. "You know the difference between us, Harold. You've never needed anyone's help. You've never lost everything. You've never known what it's like to depend on the kindness of others. I have. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest miracles come from where we least expect them." After that conversation, the report stopped. But the 30-day deadline was almost up, and the adoption process still hadn't been approved. It was on a Thursday when Dr. Jonathan called with news. "Richard, I have good and bad news. Just tell me." "The good news is that with the new medical reports proving your improved vision, the adoption process was approved in the first instance." "And the bad news?" "There's an appeal questioning your ability to care for the child. It could take a few more months to resolve." "A few months? But Child Protective Services' deadline ends tomorrow." "I know. I'm trying to get an injunction, but..." Richard hung up in despair. After everything they'd been through, they could still be separated. That night, he was in the living room practicing his exercises when Mikey appeared at the door. "Doctor, can I tell you something?" "Of course. If they take me tomorrow." "I want you to know that these were the best days of my life." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. "Mikey, no, let me speak. Before I met you, I didn't know what it was like to have a family. I didn't know how it felt for someone to care about me, teach me things, show me affection. You gave me all of that. You gave me so much too, Mikey. You gave me back my life. And you know what's really cool? Even if they take me away, I'll carry this with me forever. I'll always know that for a while I had a real dad. Richard could no longer hold back his tears. He hugged the boy with all his strength. You'll always be my son, Mikey. Always. The next morning, Richard woke up early and went to check Mikey's room. The bed was empty. Mikey, he called, starting to panic. He searched the entire house, but the boy was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Peterson arrived for work and didn't know where he was either. Dr. Richard, his bag is still here. He didn't take anything. Richard felt despair take over. Where could Mikey have gone? Why would he run away now? Then he remembered. The square. Mikey had once said that when he was confused or sad, he went back to the square where he used to live. For the first time in years, Richard left the house without telling anyone. With his limited but functional vision, he managed to reach Cathedral Square using public transportation. And there was Mikey, sitting on the same bench where Richard had first found him. Mikey! The boy looked up, surprised. Doctor, how did you find me? I knew you'd be here. Richard sat beside him. Why did you run away? Because if I'm not there when they come, maybe they'll leave you alone. Maybe they'll stop bothering you because of me. Richard's heart broke. Mikey, do you really think I care more about my peace than I do about you? It's not that, Doctor. It's just, I don't want you to suffer because of me. Listen to me, Richard said, holding the boy's hands. Do you want to know what the saddest day of my life was? Which one? The day of my accident? No. The day my wife left me? No, it was last night when I thought I was going to lose you. Mikey began to cry. But Doctor, what if they really take me away? Then we'll fight together, and if it doesn't work, we'll keep fighting. But running away doesn't solve anything, Mikey. Families stay together, even in hard times. Family? Of course. Didn't you know you were my family? Mikey smiled through his tears. I knew. I just wanted to hear you say it. They returned home together just in time for the social worker's visit, but this time she brought different news. Dr. Anderson, I received a call from the court. There's an injunction allowing Mikey to stay with you during the adoption process. Richard could hardly believe it. Really? Yes. Apparently several doctors sent letters to the judge confirming your visual recovery and ability to care for the child. Richard smiled. His colleagues hadn't completely abandoned him. Does this mean we can stay together? It means you have more time to finalize everything, and considering the progress you've already made, I believe the process will be approved. After the social worker left, Richard and Mikey hugged for a long time. We did it, Doctor. We did it, son. It was the first time Richard had called Mikey son out loud, and both felt the emotion of that moment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The following months brought big changes. Richard continued with the treatment developed by Mikey's grandfather, and his vision gradually improved. He never regained 100% of his sight, but he reached a point where he could move around independently and perform most daily activities. Mikey started attending school and proved to be an exceptional student. His teachers were impressed by his dedication and intelligence. Richard helped with homework, and those moments became some of the most precious in their lives. Dad, Mikey said one day, now accustomed to calling Richard that, can I tell you a secret? Of course, son. I think my grandfather knew this would happen, that we'd become family. Why do you think that? Because he always said that when you help someone from the heart, the universe finds a way to repay it. He helped me save your sight, and you saved me from a life on the streets. Richard smiled. The wisdom of that boy never ceased to amaze him. Your grandfather was very wise. He was. And you know what else? I think he'd be happy to know his teachings didn't die with him, that they're helping other people through me. Richard grew thoughtful. You're right. Maybe we should think about how to share this knowledge with more people. How do you mean? Well, you could help me write about your grandfather's method. Document everything properly. Who knows? Maybe other doctors like me could benefit. Mikey's eyes lit up. It'd be like continuing my grandfather's work. Exactly. And so they began a new project together. Richard used his medical expertise to scientifically document the treatment method, while Mikey contributed his grandfather's notes and his own experience applying the techniques. Dr. Robert Wilson, the ophthalmologist who had followed Richard's case, became interested in their research. Richard, this is fascinating. If we can prove this method's effectiveness with other patients, it could revolutionize the treatment for certain types of blindness. That's exactly what we're hoping for, Richard replied. Mikey's grandfather treated 12 people in his lifetime. If we can document and refine his method, imagine how many more could be helped. They began working with a small group of volunteer patients who had conditions similar to Richard's. The initial results were promising. 3 out of 5 patients showed some improvement in light perception. "Dad," Mikey said one afternoon as they organized the research data, "do you think my grandfather imagined it would go this far?" "I think your grandfather was very wise to teach you everything," Richard answered. "He knew knowledge only has value when it's passed on." "That's true. And you know what's cool? Now I understand why he always said helping people was the most important thing in life." Richard paused what he was doing and looked at Mikey. Even with his limited vision, he could see the sparkle in the boy's eyes. "Do you remember when we met in the square?" "I do. I was lost, not just physically because of the blindness. I was lost inside too. I had no hope left, no belief that my life could get better. And now I know miracles sometimes come from where we least expect them. That a 12-year-old boy can teach things to a 52-year-old doctor. That a family can be made of 2 people who met by chance in a square." Mikey smiled. "It wasn't by chance, Dad. My grandfather always said there's no such thing as chance. Only meetings that were meant to happen." "Your grandfather really was very wise." "He was. But you know who else is wise? You. For believing in me when no one else would." Richard felt a wave of affection for the boy who had become his son. "Do you know what I learned from you, Mikey?" "What?" "That we can lose many things in life, our sight, money, even important people. But as long as we have hope and people who love us, we can always start over. And sometimes, the one who needs help can also help others," added Mikey. "Exactly." That night, Richard and Mikey were in the living room. He was reading a medical report while Mikey did his homework, when Mrs. Peterson appeared with a tray of tea. "You two work too hard," she said affectionately. "Dr. Richard, it's been months since I've seen you so excited." "It's true, Betty. It's been years since I felt useful." "You've always been useful, Doctor. You saved the sight of so many people when you were an active physician." "But now it's different," Mikey chimed in. "Now we're saving people together. It's like we're a team." "That's right," Richard agreed. "And you know what else? I'm seeing things I never saw before, even when I had perfect vision." "What do you mean?" asked Mrs. Peterson. "I'm seeing the value of little things. The value of family, the value of helping others, things I didn't see when I was too busy being an important doctor." Mikey got up and hugged Richard. "Dad, can I tell you something that might sound a little silly?" "Go ahead, son." "Sometimes I'm grateful you went blind." Richard was surprised. "Why?" "Because if you hadn't gone blind, we never would have met. You'd still be an important doctor, and I'd still be a street kid. And we'd never know what it's like to be a family." Tears welled up in Richard's eyes. The emotional depth of this boy never ceased to amaze him. "You're right, Mikey. Sometimes the bad things that happen to us lead us to better places. My grandpa always said that every problem has a solution hidden inside it." "Your grandpa was a philosopher," Richard said, laughing. "He was. And you know what else he used to say?" "What?" "That when we find our true family, life feels complete. It doesn't matter if they're blood relatives or not." Richard held Mikey tightly. "Is your life complete now?" "Yes, Dad. And yours?" Richard looked around the room, Mrs. Peterson tidying up with care, Mikey in his arms, research papers scattered on the table, the sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. It's complete, son. More complete than it's ever been. Months later, Richard received a call that would change everything again. Dr. Richard, this is Dr. Elizabeth Parker from General Hospital. I heard about your research on alternative treatments for blindness. Yes, doctor? We'd like to invite you to present your findings at the next American Ophthalmology Conference. What do you think? Richard was silent for a moment. Presenting at a medical conference meant returning to the world he'd left 5 years ago, but now in a completely different position. Doctor, can I ask you something? Of course. Could my research assistant join me in the presentation? Your assistant? Sure, no problem. Great, because he's 12 years old and the one who actually developed the technique we're studying. There was a pause on the other end. 12? It's a long story, doctor, but I promise it's worth hearing. Well, that would be unprecedented. But if the results are real, they are real. And I believe the story behind them is just as important as the scientific findings. Then it's settled. I look forward to your presentation. When Richard told Mikey about the invitation, the boy was both excited and nervous. Dad, I've never talked to a room full of important doctors before. You'll do great, son. You know the method better than anyone. But what if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm just a kid talking nonsense? Richard knelt in front of Mikey and held his hands. Mikey, do you want to know what I think? I do. I think you're going to open their eyes the same way you opened mine, not just physically, but to possibilities they never imagined. You really think so? I'm sure of it. You have something many doctors lose over their careers. You still believe in miracles. The day of the presentation arrived quickly. Richard was nervous. It was his first time returning to the medical world since the accident. Mikey was even more nervous but determined. Dad, he said as they got ready at the hotel, can I start the presentation by telling the story of how we met? Of course. I think that's the best way to begin. It's just, I want them to understand that medicine isn't just about drugs and surgeries. It's about people caring for people. Richard smiled proudly. At 12 years old, Mikey already understood things many doctors take decades to learn. The auditorium was packed, over 200 ophthalmologists from across the country. When Richard and Mikey stepped onto the stage, there was a murmur of curiosity in the audience. Good afternoon, Richard began. My name is Richard Anderson, and 5 years ago I was like many of you, a successful ophthalmologist focused on modern techniques and conventional treatments. Today, I'm here to talk about how a street boy completely changed my perspective on our profession. He briefly told his story, the accident, the blindness, the despair. Then he introduced Mikey. This is my son, Michael James. He's going to tell you how a method developed by his grandfather restored part of my vision, something the best specialists said was impossible to recover. Mikey stepped up to the microphone. Even nervous, his voice came out clear and steady. Hi everyone. I know it must be strange for a 12-year-old boy to be speaking to important doctors, but I want to tell you a story that might change how you think about healing. And then Mikey told them everything, about his healer grandfather, about traditional methods, about the connection between body and mind that modern medicine sometimes forgets. He spoke with such passion and sincerity that the auditorium fell into complete silence. My grandfather always said, Mikey concluded, that the human body has healing powers we can't even imagine. But to awaken those powers, you need more than medicine. You need faith, care, and someone who believes healing is possible. The presentation lasted an hour. Richard showed the scientific results, the tests that proved his improvement, the data from other patients they had treated, but it was Mikey who touched the audience's hearts. During the Q&A, an older doctor stood up. Dr. Richard, with all due respect, how can we be sure this isn't just a placebo effect? Before Richard could answer, Mikey stepped up to the microphone. Can I answer, Dad? Richard nodded. Doctor, Mikey said, addressing the man, you're right to question. My grandfather always questioned too, but he taught me one thing: if a treatment works, if it makes someone better and doesn't harm them, why does it matter how it works? The doctor looked surprised by the response. Besides, Mikey continued, my dad didn't just get better with his sight. He got better with his sadness, his loneliness, his hopelessness. That's healing too, isn't it? The auditorium erupted in applause. Richard felt tears of pride welling in his eyes. After the presentation, dozens of doctors approached Richard and Mikey. Some skeptical, others curious, many moved by the story they'd heard. Dr. Harold Stevens, the same man who had filed complaints months earlier, approached them at the end. Richard, I need to apologize. You don't have to, Harold. I do. I was wrong about you and about the boy. You two did something extraordinary here today. Thank you, Harold. But do you know what the most extraordinary part is? What? Richard placed his hand on Mikey's shoulder. None of this would have been possible if a street kid hadn't had the courage to approach a blind man in a square and say, I know how to make you see again. Harold smiled. He was right, wasn't he? He was, Richard replied. He made me see much more than I ever imagined. That night at the hotel, Richard and Mikey were reflecting on the day. Dad, do you think we honored my grandfather's memory? We did, son, and you know what else. And I think today we started something that will help many other people. How so? Many doctors approached me, interested in learning the method. We'll be able to teach them, train new professionals. Your grandfather's knowledge will keep spreading. Mikey smiled. He'd be happy. He would, and proud of you. Dad, can I tell you a secret? Of course. Today, when I was speaking to all those doctors, I felt my grandfather with me, like he was giving me strength. Richard hugged the boy. I'm sure he was, and do you know why? Why? Because true love never dies. It lives on through the people we love and the good things we do in the world. That's why I love you and Mrs. Peterson so much, Mikey said. You made my grandfather's love live on through me. Richard felt a deep emotion fill his chest. That boy had taught him much more than healing techniques. He had taught him about family, about purpose, about the beauty of helping others. Mikey, Richard said, do you want to know the moment I knew for sure you were my son? When? It was when you told those doctors that healing isn't just about medicine, but about people caring for people. In that moment, I knew you weren't just a smart kid. You have the heart of a true healer. I learned from the best, Mikey said, smiling. My grandfather taught me about healing, but you taught me about family love. Richard reflected on everything they had been through together. A year ago, he was a broken man without hope, living in total isolation. Today, he was the father of an extraordinary boy, regaining his sight, practicing medicine in a new and meaningful way. You know what's amazing, Mikey? What? When I lost my sight, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine a future without seeing. But now I realize it was through blindness that I found you, learned your grandfather's method, and discovered a new way to help people. My grandfather always said problems are seeds of solutions, Mikey said. We just have to plant them in the right place. Your grandfather was a poet as much as a healer. He was. And you know what else he taught me? What? That when we're doing what we were born to do, the whole universe conspires to help us. Richard looked at Mikey with admiration. And do you think we're doing what we were born to do? I'm sure, Dad. You were born to be a doctor and to be my father. I was born to carry on my grandfather's work and to be your son. How do you know that? Because I've never felt as happy and complete as I do now, and because every time we help someone see better, I feel like I'm in the right place doing the right thing. Richard smiled. That boy's wisdom never ceased to amaze him. Then let's keep going, son. Let's help as many people as we can. Let's do it, Dad, together. And that's how Richard and Mikey became a team, not just as father and son, but as partners in a mission that had begun with a seemingly chance meeting in a square, one that turned out to be the most important encounter of their lives. Months later, they had established a specialized clinic that blended traditional medicine with the methods developed by Mikey's grandfather. Hundreds of patients had benefited, and other doctors had begun incorporating some of the techniques into their own practices. Dad, Mikey said one afternoon as they reviewed the week's cases, do you remember that first day in the square? How could I forget? You thought I was just a kid trying to pull a fast one. And you thought I was just a man too proud to accept help. Funny how wrong we were about each other. Or how right we were in a different way, Richard reflected. You really were a kid trying something that seemed impossible. And I really was a man who needed to open his mind to new possibilities. And in the end, it all worked out. In the end, son, it worked out far better than either of us could have imagined. That evening, Richard was in his office organizing files when he heard Mikey call him from the living room. Dad, come see something. Richard went to the living room and found Mikey standing by the window. What is it, son? Look outside, it's starting to rain. Richard stepped closer to the window. With his limited but functional vision, he could see the first raindrops sliding down the glass. What about the rain? My grandpa always said rain was nature renewing itself, washing away what was dirty, watering what needed to grow. Richard watched the rain for a few moments. Your grandpa was right. Sometimes life needs a good rain to start fresh. It's true. And you know what I was thinking? What? Our life was like that. There was a big storm when you lost your sight and I became an orphan, but then came this good rain that made everything grow again. Richard wrapped his arm around Mikey's shoulders. And now, son, what do you think comes after the rain? The sun, Dad. The sun always comes. Richard smiled, watching the rain wash over the city outside. In his mind, he could see the future waiting for them, not with his eyes, but with his heart. A future full of possibilities, people to help, and love to share. You know what else, Mikey? What? I think the sun is already shining. Even with all this rain? Sometimes the most beautiful sun is the one we feel inside, Richard said, hugging his son. And that's the sun I feel every day ever since you touched my arm in that square and said, I know how to make you see again. And I was right, wasn't I? You were, son. You helped me see far more than I ever had in my life. As the rain continued to fall outside, Richard and Mikey stood there, father and son, bound by a love born from pain and transformed into the greatest blessing of their lives. The journey that had begun with a beggar boy and a blind man in a New York City square had become a story of hope, healing, and family, one that would continue to inspire people for years to come. Because sometimes the greatest miracles come from where we least expect them, and the deepest healing doesn't just happen in the eyes, but in the heart. The end. Now, tell us, what did you think of this story of perseverance and family love? Do you believe Richard made the right choice in trusting Mikey? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories that touch the soul.